You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. Welcome, friends. Jim Cantelon here. Always a pleasure to come your way. I'm a pastor. I've been in the ministry for 53 years, and I feel like I've just begun. I really do. That's the thing about studying the Bible. The more you study it, the more you realize you don't know. It's an adventure in learning. Too soon old, too late smart, they say. But we're going through Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. It's taken us 5 years to get to this point. We're picking it up in John chapter 11, and I hope you're enjoying the journey. I'll be back with more right after this.
WOW! Working for Orphans and Widows has been caring for orphans and widows in Africa and India for over 20 years. Key to its vision is partnership with local champions who engage hundreds of church-based volunteers in home-based care. Care for the sick and the dying in their own humble homes. They are defenseless and afflicted. They are the least of these that Jesus would have us love and care for. Our partnered champions are based in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and India. They provide faithful, accountable, and godly care for thousands. Together with WOW, they truly are the hands and feet of Jesus to the sick and the dying. Founder and President Jim Cantelon has been committed to both teaching the gospel via Cantelon Today TV and practicing the gospel through WOW. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
So, friends, I'm going to get into John 11 here in just a moment, but I want to take a few minutes just to give you a little update on WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. You see us promoting it during the break in this program. It's a ministry that my wife Kathy and I started 23 years ago in response to the HIV and AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. At that time, HIV was always fatal, and it was wiping out a whole generation of young adults, leaving thousands, tens of thousands of orphans to be raised by their grandmothers or by other family members. But it just complicated and compiled the essential poverty and at-risk status that they already were living with. And it was our calling from the Lord, I believe, to challenge the churches of sub-Saharan Africa to care for orphans and widows. You know, King David said, God is a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows in his holy habitation. Obviously, core values of heaven are the orphan and the widow, who have no defender, who have no provider. And so God says, I'll do that. And how does he do it? He does it through his people. And so I felt that what I would try to do as a pastor was challenge the churches of sub-Saharan Africa to get engaged in the care of orphans and widows. The problem was the stigma and discrimination attached to HIV and AIDS. And I had to really work that one through. I won't take time to tell you many stories, which I could, but suffice to say it was not an easy beginning. However, 23 years later, it's a major story. You can check out just a little bit of an overview of our work at wowmission.com on the internet. But I don't have any updates there right now. I will have soon. A recent trip that my wife and I took to visit our champions, as I call them, our champion ministries on the ground in sub-Saharan Africa. I showed a few pics a few weeks ago. I'm going to show them again, but then I want to show you something I didn't show then. But here's a picture of one of the little villages we work in Malawi, just after Cyclone Freddy struck a few weeks ago. Horrific conditions. I mean, these people are living in mud brick homes with, if they're fortunate, a metal roof Often it's a straw roof. But, the flooding began and they had nowhere to go. And so they were devastated. And many of these mud brick homes eventually disintegrated. And I'll show you a picture of one of them in a minute. But also in the urban areas, this is in Lilongwe, one of the urban centers in Malawi, there was destruction. Walls were falling over, concrete telephone poles were falling down. People were having to skip around live wires. And it was just, a horror for them. But here's the pic I wanted you to see. This is what happens to a mud brick home. When the rains come and the wind blows, those mud bricks basically just disintegrate and they melt before your eyes. And what's happened here is this house has just collapsed, and that's what's left of it. That was someone's home. And that's only after maybe a day and a half of this cyclone. It was a horror, but this is just one little indication of what happened. And so many of our dear friends that we are ministering to there had to try to find higher ground. And you notice they're smiling. It's amazing. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. When we're involved in Africa personally, as we are a couple times a year, I'm always astonished at the joy in the lives of those who have nothing. Why do they have such joy? They have such joy because they have the Lord. They're believers. They love Jesus. And they've often said to me, we may not have food, we may not have the proper clothing or housing, but we have the Lord. And believe me, on a Sunday when they gather together in their little humble church buildings, some of them made of mud bricks, some of them made of mud, some of them made of cement blocks, depending on where they are just full of Jesus. And they don't care about what's happening around them. They just look forward to the day when they're going to see the Lord. But here's something I didn't show you last time, and I want to show you this now. This is a road leading to one of our villages, okay? It's just on the outskirts of Lilongwe, on the way to one of the rural areas. So you see some pavement there. But here's one of these creeks that's overflowing. And I have one that's much longer, but I don't have time to show it to you. But you can understand why when people get caught in this kind of flooding, they get swept away. And there was over 500 who died during Cyclone Freddy. We deal with orphans and widows who are dying. We provide them home-based care. That's what WOW does. And we're talking here about twice a week visits, updates on their medical condition, making sure we can get them to a clinic if they're in desperate straits, providing topical ointments, things for bed sores, oral thrush, fevers, various kinds of breathing complications. But when they need a doctor's care, then we get them to a doctor. And believe me, it's a humble conveyance. Usually it's an ox cart or a bicycle, if you can believe it. Here's someone who's half dead or half alive, trying to balance in the back of a bicycle for 10 kilometers, or in the back of an ox cart, bump, 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 bump. But they go with what they got. Anyway, we are involved in that kind of thing with home-based care. But because of the impact of Cyclone Freddy, we are involved right now in the rebuild. And you saw that road, you saw that one house, multiply those things scores and scores of times. And so what we're doing is we're repairing a few roads, we're putting in a few key culverts, we're rebuilding a number of latrines. How important are those? And rebuilding a number of humble mud brick houses. It's not expensive, but it does cost. And I told our partners there, look, I don't have deep pockets. WOW, is a humble ministry, but the Lord provides through dedicated, godly people who support the work that we're doing. And if you'd like to help out, WOW, now is the time to do it. The coordinates are there during the break when you see the WOW promotion. You can log on, you can link up, you can do whatever, and it will really, really make a difference. And I'm very grateful. I just got the estimate from Malawi just this week. I know how much is needed, and by God's grace, we're going to send it all. And because we trust our people on the ground, we know it will be properly applied and the rebuild will begin. Okay, enough. Let's get back to the scriptures here. I think I can find it here, if I'm not mistaken. It's, John 11. The Pharisees are so frustrated with this raising of Lazarus. They know what to do. They're fit to be tied. So they call a meeting with the Sanhedrin, and they say, what are we accomplishing? Here's this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize it's better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. And not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and to make them one. Tombs or sepulchres, as they were called, were sometimes excavated from the living rock. For wealthier persons, they were excavated, or for not so wealthy people, they were adapted, sometimes from natural caves. John's reference to Lazarus' tomb, we read about this last time, so I'm kind of going ahead and going back at the same time. Follow me. He refers to a stone laying on it. Not rolled up against it, but laying on it, which suggests horizontal rather than vertical, right? It suggests that this tomb was subterranean, with the entrance blocked horizontally. Now, I've been to what is believed to be Lazarus' tomb in Bethany, and it is indeed subterranean. It is accessed by a descending stairway that has been cut out of the living rock, 26 steps. Very labor intensive, showing us that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus had the means. And John calls it a cave. It certainly is, but formed well below the surface. I've been to many tombs in Israel. I've not seen anything quite like this one. It's unique and was and is witness to a crucial turning point in Jesus' story. For Jesus' enemies, the rising of Lazarus from the dead would be the final straw. And that's exactly the point of what I read just a moment ago. The Pharisees just didn't know what to do. I'll be back right after this.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
So the tomb was below the ground. The stone was lying on the opening to the tomb or the sepulcher. So Jesus goes down to it, and there he calls Lazarus forward. Now, when a dead body was embalmed, it was also buried on the day of the death. This still is the case. It's very rare that a Jewish person is not buried on the day that they die. Sometimes just, there's certain logistical exigencies that just don't allow that to happen. But when I lived in Israel, I had a few Israeli friends, elderly, who died while we were there. And they might die at 10 in the morning and they're buried at 4 in the afternoon. They might die at noon, they're buried at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's very sudden. They do not embalm the body like we do. They don't use a coffin like we do. They wrap the body, in a burial cloth, and the grave has already been hastily dug, and the body is lowered. It's covered. That's it. Then the Jewish family sits Shiva, as they call it, for a week. They sit in their home mourning. All the mirrors are covered. The clothing they wear is old clothing, and there has to be a rip in it. There's always food available, and friends come, from far and wide, family members as well, and they sit Shiva. They sit and they talk about the departed. They comfort the one who's been bereaved, and that is the process. Here in the West, we have what's called a wake, before the burial. Usually it's 2 to 3 days. This is 6, 7 days after the person's been buried. Okay. Now here was the thing. In their view, in Israel, the soul of the departed would linger for 3 days in hope of resuscitation. That never happened, but that was the hope. But on the 4th day, decomposition would begin, and the soul would find its way, to Hades, as they called it, to that shadowy underworld. And this was the view of the Pharisees, who held the hope that one day Hades would release its prisoners at the general resurrection on the day of the Lord. So unlike the Sadducees, who did not believe in resurrection, the Pharisees did. The Sadducees had no such hope because their theology was limited to the parameters of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and there's no mention of resurrection there. So secular Israelis had a similar view, and on the few occasions when one of our friends in Jerusalem died, we'd see the death notices posting, declaring, so-and-so is no more, in stark Hebrew letters in black on a white background. John Smith is no more. For them, death is final. Martha was distressed by Jesus' command to open the tomb, and rightly so. It's going to be a bad smell. But Jesus knew what he was about to do. He had done it before. He had not only reminded his questioning cousin John about his messianic power to preach, to heal, to raise the dead, but he had raised both Jairus' daughter and the son of the widow in Nain. In each situation, he had revealed the glory of God. He'd done it before. He didn't usually, however, preface his miracles with public prayer. But on this occasion, he did. I think he wanted the assembled people to know that his power derived from his heavenly Father. He was not demon-possessed or a super demon, as his religious enemies had tried to make him out to be. He was no magician. Rather, he was the dependent son. The Father's glory, not his own, was to be manifest. So after thanking his Father, he shouted, "Lazarus, come out!" And out he came. There was no need for John to describe the astonishment of the mourners. In a matter of minutes, word had spread, and the Sanhedrin called an emergency meeting, and we read that meeting. Boy, this was a tough time. So, let's actually go back to verse 45. That'll help us. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here's this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You don't realize that it's better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for the nation, that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Wow. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were afraid. They'd been trying to trap, to silence, to undercut this seditious Galilean without success. He had always bested them, every time. And now he had raised a prominent citizen from the dead. I mean, what do we do now? Their frustration knew no bounds. So what are we accomplishing? You know, we argue with him, we try to stone him, we diss him, we spill out all kinds of disinformation about him. He's above it all. What are we going to do? There was a palpable fear on their part that Jesus would win the country to his purported messianic vision, that he would incite Rome to take severe reprisals, and all would be lost. The Sanhedrin had their protocols for meetings, but in this case, decorum, parliamentary procedure, and hierarchical deferences were lost. It was pandemonium, is what it was. So Caiaphas, the high priest, raises his voice above the fury, and he shouts, "You don't know what you're talking about. Be quiet and listen." So they quieten down. This man has got to die, or else our temple, our city, our nation will be lost. That's how serious this is. Better he should die than all of us at the hands of the Romans. John says he was speaking prophetically. No, Caiaphas was no prophet. He was not a godly man. But John sees a prophetic nuance here. Jesus would die for the nation. One man for the nation. Not just the nation of the Jews, but for the nations of the world. Caiaphas convinced them, and the plot to kill Jesus began. And these guys had no idea what they were up to. The word got back to Jesus. Verse 54. Therefore Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. Was Jesus afraid? No, he wasn't afraid. But he had regard and he had respect for history, for God's timing, and also for these sheep of whom he was shepherd. He knew that if he hung around there would be, without question, some major disturbance, and he didn't want his sheep scattered. He didn't want anyone hurt. He knew there was someone who would be hurt, and it would be he. But you just see the kindness of Jesus in this. You know, friends, it's difficult for us sometimes to divorce Jesus and his story from what we popularly call religion. And I understand, the word religion is very commonly used. In fact, in Israel today, if you're an ultra-Orthodox or even an Orthodox Jew, you're called religious or very religious. They call me religious. I've never thought of myself as religious because religion to me meant some kind of a man-made effort to earn marks with God. And it's not about me earning anything. It's about Christ earning my salvation by his substitutionary death on the cross of Calvary. It's not by any work of righteousness that I've done, but according to his mercy that I'm saved. And that's true for you too. Nevertheless, Jesus was kind. And often, religion is cast in any light other than kind. It can be seen as strict, rigorous, legalistic, overbearing, exclusive. Any number of adjectives might apply. Jesus was the Good Shepherd. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. And he knows our frame, that we are dust. He knows our limitations because he became one of us. He understands what it's like to be human. And it's worth embracing him as our Savior.
In Africa, even the most basic medical aid is often non-existent.
It is a continent that has been ravaged by disease. Malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, and AIDS are unrelenting. Every man, woman, and child suffers from a lack of adequate health care. Even treatable illnesses like diarrhea and upper respiratory infections can prove deadly. Clinics are too few and often beyond the reach of those in rural areas. WOW, working for Orphans and Widows, is equipping mobile medical clinics with knowledge and tools to reach out to the sick. Trained nurses are treating the ill. Communities are being educated on hygiene and disease prevention. Voluntary counseling and testing for HIV and AIDS is also offered through the clinic. Fear of stigma and discrimination keeps many from being tested for HIV. Nurses address this issue. They work to provide emotional and medical support for those who test positive for the virus. Communities are being transformed through education and medical treatment brought by mobile clinics. Knowledge about disease transmission is changing behaviors and preventing many illnesses. Basic health care prevents needless deaths. Voluntary counseling and testing has also curbed the spread of AIDS.
Many people have learned a lot about HIV/AIDS. Since we are taught, we are trained as community health workers, we have the knowledge, we give it to them, even through role plays and everything, even by talking to them as we go in the villages. So now people are aware what HIV/AIDS is, how it can be prevented, how it can be infected, and all that.
By supporting WOW's Working for Orphans and Widows mobile medical clinics, you can bring hope to countless communities. You can save a life.
Now, friends, I don't have a copy of it with me here, but you can log on to the internet and just Google in or just type in Cantelon's Casual Commentary. Cantelon's Casual Commentary. And what it is a commentary on Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. I wrote it during COVID to be an assist to those who are interested in this, along with what you're gaining from studying the scriptures with me by way of television or the internet or Roku or YouTube, whatever system you use. But you can log on, and it's a commentary. Not everybody wants a commentary, but if you want to have some value added beyond what we can provide on the program, this is the route to go. And it will cost you a few bucks. I'd say it's well worth it. It is something that I really put my life's blood into. It took me a few years to write, and I hope it will help to you. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.